Logan Mitchell stood in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at a version of himself he hadn't seen in decades. Gone was the polished CEO of Mitchell Motorsports, the man in custom suits with neatly trimmed hair and a confident stride. In his place stood someone far more ordinary, Jake Anderson, a fictional software engineer with fading jeans, a worn leather jacket, and 3 days of stubble shadowing his jawline. Logan adjusted the wire-framed glasses resting on his nose. Non-prescription, of course. Then pulled a ball cap lower over his brow. The transformation was complete. It was a disguise not for vanity, but for purpose. He wasn't just dressing down for fun. He was about to walk into his own empire, not as its king, but as a stranger, trying to see what the throne looked like from the outside. The idea had come to him during a sleepless night while he was reviewing customer satisfaction reports and noticing patterns others had missed. They weren't dramatic dips, just small changes in tone, subtle hints of dissatisfaction buried between positive reviews. But Logan had built Mitchell Motorsports into one of the largest motorcycle dealership networks in the country by paying attention to the small things. It had started in his parents' garage with a toolbox and a dream. Now it spanned across 5 states with premium showrooms and a loyal clientele. Still, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was off. He'd spent too long at the top, looking down at spreadsheets and trusting others to tell him what the day-to-day looked like. It was time to go see for himself. The morning air was brisk as Logan pulled into the parking lot, not in his reserved CO space near the entrance, but in the far corner designated for walk-in customers. His heart beat faster than he expected. Even after all these years, there was something thrilling about stepping into a dealership full of chrome leather and raw horsepower. But this time, he wasn't the boss. He was Jake Anderson, a 47-year-old tech guy who'd just sold some stock and was ready to indulge in his midlife adventure, a story close enough to his real background that it wouldn't raise suspicions. He had practiced it in front of the mirror. His backstory was airtight, just like every detail of the persona he was about to step into. The glass doors of Mitchell Motorsports slid open, revealing a showroom gleaming with polished bikes under soft, strategically placed lighting. Logan paused at the entrance, drinking in the sight. The layout, the scent of leather and motor oil, the subtle music playing overhead. It was all exactly how he had envisioned it during the redesign phase 2 years ago. But now, everything looked different. Not worse, just unfamiliar. He wasn't greeted with deference or recognition, only with the standard smile of a sales associate going through morning motions. "Welcome to Mitchell Motorsports," said a young woman with bright eyes and a professional tone. "Anything I can help you find today?" Logan gave a practiced, awkward chuckle. "Just browsing. Been saving up for this for a while, you know. Not quite sure what I want yet." His voice was pitched slightly higher than normal, and he buried his hands in his jacket pockets like a man a little overwhelmed by choice. As he walked through the rows of motorcycles, he could feel the difference. No one rushed to serve him. No one treated him like he owned the place, because of course they had no idea he did, and that was exactly what he wanted. He leaned in to examine a Ducati Panigale V4, pretending to read the specs with curiosity, even though he knew every inch of its engineering. As other staff moved around him, he listened, really listened, to how they spoke to other customers, how they answered questions, how they guided or pushed or ignored. It was a kind of observational research Logan hadn't done in years, and the more he observed, the more he realized that the numbers in the quarterly reports hadn't been lying. There were cracks in the system, not gaping, but hairline fractures that, left unchecked, could bring down even the sturdiest machine. For the next hour, he walked the showroom as Jake Anderson, software engineer and first-time bike buyer. He asked about pricing, financing, trade-ins. He lingered near the accessories section and made note of how long it took before someone approached. He pretended to be uncertain, hoping to see how the staff handled a hesitant customer. Some employees shined, offering patient guidance and genuine enthusiasm. Others, however, seemed impatient, distracted, or too eager to close a sale. It was an eye-opener, and it was just the beginning. Logan hadn't come here looking for villains. He was looking for answers. What he didn't expect to find, however, was a secret buried far deeper than poor customer service. Something was happening behind the scenes at Mitchell Motorsports, and his undercover journey was about to uncover more than he bargained for. Logan wandered deeper into the showroom, keeping his gait casual, his eyes roaming like a customer unsure of what he wanted but excited by the possibilities. The dealership was alive with low murmurs of conversation, the soft hum of display screens, and the occasional rev from a demo bike being started outside for a test ride. As Jake Anderson, the customer, he looked around not for a motorcycle to buy, but for the subtleties most would overlook: the tone of the voices, the way sales associates moved, the timing of their greetings. That was the real product here: experience. And he was here to see exactly what kind of experience his dealership was offering. The first person to approach him was Emily, mid-20s, bright smile, clipboard in hand. "Looking for anything specific today?" she asked, her voice chipper but not pushy. Logan responded with a sheepish smile. "Honestly, I'm not even sure where to start. First bike." Emily's face lit up, not with commission hunger, but with genuine enthusiasm. "That's awesome. You're in for a ride, literally. Let's start with what kind of riding you imagine yourself doing. Weekend cruising? Long road trips? Something sporty?" For the next 10 minutes, she walked him through the basics. She explained the difference between cruisers and sport bikes, upright seating versus aggressive riding posture, the pros and cons of ABS and traction control. She even shared her personal favorite, a Triumph Street Twin, and why she loved its balance of style and comfort. She never talked down to him, never assumed he knew or didn't know something. She read his cues, offered options, answered questions. Logan was impressed, not just by her product knowledge, but by her emotional intelligence. But then came Chad. Logan had seen his type 100 times, back when he was a salesman himself in the early days. Chad walked over while Emily was showing Logan a mid-range model. He gave her a brief nod, then stepped in between them. "Hey there," he said smoothly, flashing a practiced smile. "Looking at the entry-level stuff? You strike me as someone who'd really appreciate the higher-end bikes." Logan raised an eyebrow but played along. "I mean, I've got a little saved up, but I'm not sure I want to blow it all on one purchase." Chad chuckled. "That's what financing is for. Look, let me show you something. If you want to feel what a real machine rides like, you don't start with the basics." Without waiting for permission, he began walking toward the corner of the showroom, where the most expensive bikes gleamed under their own set of display lights. Logan followed, staying in character, but his internal alarm bells were ringing. As they reached the BMW S1000RR, Chad launched into his pitch. He tossed around jargon like torque ratios and horsepower thresholds, but it was all flash and little substance. When Logan asked specific questions about handling at lower speeds or long-distance comfort, Chad deflected. "You're not going to be riding this to the grocery store," he smirked. "This is about the thrill, man. About feeling alive." Logan nodded thoughtfully, all while taking mental notes. Chad didn't ask about the customer's experience level. Didn't probe for safety concerns. Didn't offer a beginner's perspective or suggest trying a test ride on something more manageable first. He was selling the dream, the speed, the power, the image. And worse, he was doing it with subtle manipulation, painting Logan as someone who would be settling for less if he didn't go all in. When Chad stepped away to check availability, Logan quietly walked back toward the display area where Emily was assisting another customer. From a distance, he watched her walk an older gentleman through several different models, patiently answering questions and even suggesting a used bike for better value. Her style couldn't have contrasted more with Chad's. She didn't sell machines. She sold comfort, confidence, and connection. Logan made a mental note. Whatever sales training he implemented going forward, it would need to start with her approach. The kind of sales culture he wanted at Mitchell Motorsports wasn't built on high-pressure tactics or inflated egos. It was built on relationships, trust, listening. Over the next hour, Logan moved from department to department, subtly engaging with other staff members. Some mirrored Emily's professionalism, while others leaned closer to Chad's aggressive techniques. One employee barely looked up from his phone when Logan asked about accessories. Another gave him the wrong specs on a helmet sizing chart. It wasn't a disaster, but the inconsistency was undeniable. And inconsistency, Logan knew from experience, was the first step toward brand erosion. In a competitive industry like motorcycles, the product would only carry them so far. What mattered more was the story told around that product. The feeling a customer walked out with when they left the dealership, whether or not they bought anything that day. By the time Logan left the dealership that afternoon, the excitement he had felt that morning was giving way to something more complex. He was proud of some things: Emily's performance, the showroom's design, the energy in the service area, but he also saw cracks that ran deeper than quarterly surveys could reveal. If Emily represented the best of Mitchell Motorsports, then Chad, and others like him, represented a drift from the culture he had worked so hard to build. As Jake Anderson, he had gotten a first-hand look at what worked and what didn't. But as Logan Mitchell, he now faced a larger challenge: how to fix something quietly slipping off track without losing the soul that made it special. And though he didn't know it yet, what he had seen so far was only the surface. Much darker truths were waiting just beneath. Logan had just settled into the familiar seat of a BMW S1000 RR1, of the dealership's most expensive and high-performance models, when it happened. He gripped the handlebars, testing their responsiveness, adjusting the mirrors more out of habit than necessity. The leather was cold under his fingertips, the engine quiet, but he could practically hear its roar in his mind. He'd worked on this exact model's promotional launch a year ago. But today, as Jake Anderson, he was just a curious first-time buyer. Beside him, Chad was still in full sales mode, detailing torque specs and offering Logan a deal that sounded increasingly rehearsed. Logan nodded politely, pretending to listen, but his attention was drifting. His ears had picked up something just beyond the polished confidence of Chad's voice. Two customers had wandered over from the other side of the showroom, loitering near the row of touring bikes. Their conversation was quiet, barely audible, but something in their tone made Logan tune in. Maybe it was the way one leaned a little too close to the other, the way they both kept glancing over their shoulders. Or maybe it was just instinct. The same instinct that had kept Logan from signing off on dozens of bad business deals over the years. Whatever it was, his focus sharpened in an instant. He shifted slightly in his seat, angling his body so he could hear better without drawing attention. Chad continued his pitch, oblivious, while the two men spoke just loud enough for Logan to catch a few critical words. Guy named Rick. Gets you whatever you want. Half price. No paperwork. Logan's breath caught. His fingers, still resting on the BMW's clutch lever, went rigid. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just listened, carefully, as the men continued in hushed tones. Off the books. Marked as damaged. Disappears in transport. Shows up clean at your place. The words were casual. Too casual. Logan's stomach turned. The name hit him like a steel pipe to the chest. Rick. There were 100 Ricks in the world, but only one mattered in this context. Rick Dalton, his warehouse manager, his late-night problem solver, the man who'd been with him for 3 years and who had recently recommended the overhaul of their inventory tracking system. A system that had, until now, seemed too perfect to question. Logan's mind started connecting dots he hadn't realized were even on the same page. The minor inventory discrepancies, the occasional damaged during transit flags, bikes marked as totaled, yet never properly accounted for in disposal records. At the time, he had attributed it to growing pains, glitches in the new system, minor clerical errors, but now, sitting on a 6-figure motorcycle with two strangers casually discussing black market sales on his own showroom floor, the reality came crashing in. This wasn't a mistake. This was organized theft. And someone inside his trusted circle was pulling the strings. He forced himself to stay calm. Chad was still speaking, something about extended warranties, but Logan barely heard him. "I think I need a few minutes to walk around," he said, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. Chad handed him a business card with a practiced smile and a handshake. Logan stepped away, pretending to admire a row of vintage motorcycles while keeping the two men in his peripheral vision. His instincts had never failed him before, and they weren't failing now. One of the men, older, with tattooed arms and a worn leather vest, checked his phone, nodded, and said, "Ray will reach out later. He'll walk you through it." Logan's pulse quickened again. Ray? Another name, another crack in the wall. As Logan drifted through the showroom, his eyes took on a different sharpness. Every polished surface suddenly looked like it could be hiding something. Every friendly smile from a passing employee was now a potential mask. He watched the two men wander toward the exit, heard one of them chuckle and say, "Good thing the owner's too busy counting profits to notice." That comment hit harder than he expected. Was that how he was seen? Some out-of-touch executive with no clue what was happening in his own house? His stomach tightened. Logan had walked in this morning searching for customer service flaws. He hadn't expected to find betrayal in the foundation of everything he'd built. He waited until the men left before slowly making his way toward the back of the showroom. His mind was spinning with questions. Who else was involved? How long had this been going on? How many bikes had vanished under his nose? He could feel the threads of something big, much bigger than a few shady deals, starting to pull loose. And he knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a one-person operation. It was systemic, it was organized, and it had been designed to operate in plain sight, betting that no one at the top would ever come down far enough to notice. But today, Logan Mitchell had noticed. And he wasn't leaving until he uncovered the whole truth, even if it meant ripping the walls down to find it. Logan Mitchell walked the rows of motorcycles with a quiet purpose, keeping his expression neutral, though inside his mind was a storm. The BMW he'd just dismounted now felt like a crime scene, glimmering evidence of something darker beneath the showroom lights. Behind him, the two customers strolled casually toward the exit, speaking in tones that to any other ear might seem harmless. But Logan was tuned in now. Deeply. One of the men, the one with tattooed arms and the too casual swagger, spoke just loud enough for Logan to catch the words. "Rick marks the bikes as damaged. Says they're going in for repair. Next thing you know, they show up at your place, clean, unregistered. No VIN trace, no paperwork, nothing." The other man chuckled, flipping through a glossy catalogue as if he were picking out curtains instead of stolen machines. "Ray handles the drop, right?" the second man asked. "Yep," the first replied. "Rick sets it up in the system, Ray finishes the job on the back end." It was a full-blown operation hiding in plain sight. Logan felt his stomach twist. Rick Dalton, the man he trusted to oversee warehouse logistics, the one who volunteered for late-night inventory checks and pushed for system upgrades, was forging records to cover for stolen bikes. Not just one or two bikes either. This was systematic, routine, embedded in the very processes Logan had approved. He thought back to the inventory reports from the past few months. Those slight inconsistencies marked as damaged in transit or lost during service routing. Each time, Rick had reassured him that it was a minor clerical error, a glitch in the new tracking software. Logan, busy with expansion plans and press interviews, had let it go. He'd told himself he didn't need to micromanage. That was why he had people like Rick, people he could trust. But now, trust felt like a word he no longer understood. As he made his way back toward the service department, Logan pulled out his phone and opened the dealership's remote management app, a feature Rick himself had recommended and configured. He began reviewing recent entries under internal adjustments. And there it was. A pattern so subtle it would have passed any casual audit. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, a high-end model, BMW, Ducati, sometimes a rare Harley, was marked damaged during internal transport. The paper trail appeared airtight. The repair facility documentation, the damage assessments, even the staff sign-offs. But Logan knew what real reports looked like. These were too clean, too consistent. Real-world mechanics didn't use the same phrasing every time. They didn't copy-paste estimates down to the decimal. He stared at the screen, the glow of data reflecting in his glasses, and felt a cold wave pass over him. His dealership, his legacy, was being used as a front. They weren't just stealing bikes. They were laundering them through his systems, camouflaging theft as routine service, and it had likely been happening for months, maybe even longer. Logan tried to steady his breathing as he walked past the glass-walled finance office. Everything around him still looked perfect. Pristine chrome, polished floors, friendly employees helping smiling customers. But behind that polish, behind the air of professionalism and warmth, was something rotten. A secret network, quietly bleeding his business dry, while he smiled for the cameras and shook hands at ribbon cuttings. He stepped outside for air, the autumn wind biting at his cheeks, his heart pounding. Years ago, when he was still wrenching bikes in a leaky garage, he'd promised himself he would build something better, something honest, something people could trust. And now that trust had been violated from the inside, not just by criminals masquerading as employees, but by his own inattention. That was the hardest truth to face. He'd let it happen. Not through malice or laziness, but through misplaced confidence. Confidence that his systems were strong, that his people were loyal, that his legacy was secure. And now he stood in the parking lot of the very place he'd built from scratch, realizing that the cracks in the foundation were wider and deeper than he ever imagined. But Logan wasn't a man who backed away from a challenge. Not then and not now. He took one last look at the building, at the giant Mitchell Motorsports sign glinting under the sun, and made a silent vow. He would find out how far this went, who else was involved, how many bikes had vanished, and most importantly, how to stop it before it destroyed everything. There was no room left for assumptions, no more comfort in delegation. From this moment on, Logan Mitchell wasn't just going undercover, he was going to war, for his business, his people, and the truth. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly as Logan stepped inside, scanning the room for a quiet corner where he could work without drawing attention. A booth near the back offered enough privacy, and within minutes he had his laptop open, the screen angled away from the rest of the room. His untouched Americano sat steaming beside him, forgotten. The cozy setting, with its exposed brick walls and indie music drifting through the air, was a stark contrast to the urgency flooding Logan's mind. He wasn't just following a hunch anymore. He was chasing something real, and time wasn't on his side. What had started as a casual undercover visit had become a personal mission to dismantle something sinister embedded in the very core of Mitchell Motorsports. And the first thread to tug was Rick Dalton. Logan pulled up Rick's personnel file, reviewing it with new eyes. Everything had seemed solid at the time of hiring. Clean background check, glowing references, a tight resume with stints at 3 other high-volume dealerships. On the surface, nothing stood out. But now, every detail felt suspicious. He opened a browser and began a deep dive, starting with the dealerships Rick had worked for before joining Mitchell Motorsports. It didn't take long to find a pattern. The first company had gone bankrupt 6 months after Rick left, citing inventory losses and financial discrepancies. The second had suffered a mysterious warehouse fire that destroyed dozens of high-value bikes. The third had shut down following an insurance fraud investigation. In each case, Rick's name never made headlines, but his employment timelines matched precisely with each collapse. Logan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Rick hadn't just stumbled into this situation. He was a professional, a ghost who embedded himself, extracted what he needed, and vanished before the system could catch him. He took a deep breath and opened the dealership's internal payroll portal. He needed to know if Rick had help. Scrolling through the employee database, Logan paused on one name: Samantha Pierce. She was one of the newer hires in the sales team. Friendly, smart, well-spoken, the kind of person you'd want representing your brand, but something had felt slightly off about her, even earlier that day when she passed him a smile that seemed too perfectly placed. He clicked her file. Like Rick, her background check was pristine. Her resume detailed short tenures at dealerships in different states, all about 18-24 months in length. No red flags. At least not until Logan started comparing timelines. Each of her jobs had overlapped, just slightly, with Rick's. Different locations, different departments, but the coincidences stacked too neatly. They weren't random hires, they were a team. Digging deeper into their onboarding documents, Logan noticed that both Rick and Samantha had been hired during hiring surges, periods when the company had expanded or restructured and when scrutiny was lower than usual. Rick had referred two technicians during his third month, both of whom had already left the company, but whose departure paperwork was incomplete. Samantha had requested her initial assignment be shifted to customer-facing sales instead of finance, citing prior retail strengths, and Logan had approved both requests. He felt a tightness form in his chest, not from guilt alone, but from the growing realization that every single one of these details had been planted. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was infiltration, a slow, methodical embedding of criminal elements into his company under the guise of ordinary staffing. He downloaded the full employment records for both Rick and Samantha, highlighting overlaps in payroll, location changes, referral networks, and job roles. A disturbing mosaic emerged, one that pointed to coordination, not coincidence. Matching emails, phone numbers listed on emergency contact forms that traced back to burner accounts, even similarities in benefit elections. Samantha had chosen the same obscure vision coverage plan that Rick had, likely to avoid sharing employer-covered health insurance info that might reveal real identities. They were ghosts in a system that had trusted them too easily, and Logan's own procedures had left just enough room for them to operate undetected. He knew then that if Rick and Samantha were working together, there were likely others, perhaps in finance, service, or even IT. Had said it well to prohibit hope for happiness, not experienced, or finances, or even their lives depended on it. And if they'd done this before, they wouldn't be sloppy, not unless they felt rushed. That's when Logan remembered something else. A brief request Rick had made a few weeks ago. An overnight update to the warehouse's security camera firmware, to improve bandwidth and reduce file storage. At the time, it had seemed harmless, even proactive. But now it reeked of manipulation. Logan opened the dealership's security vendor portal, using his admin credentials. The logs showed that during that maintenance window, video capture had been suspended for 6 hours. The very same night, a $38,000 0-cents Ducati was marked as damaged and logged out of inventory. There had been no footage, no signature of receipt, just a line in the digital ledger, approved by Rick. That was the final confirmation Logan needed. They weren't just skimming, they were running a full operation under his nose. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, exhaustion and anger settling over him like a second skin. This wasn't just about money. This was about the soul of the company he'd spent 2 decades building. His brand, his people, his community trust. Everything was on the line. If the public ever found out Mitchell Motorsports had been used as a front for organized theft, the damage would be irreversible. But now he had something powerful in his hands. Knowledge. The pieces were aligning, and while his heart ached at the betrayal, his resolve had never been sharper. He closed his laptop slowly, took one last sip of his cold coffee and stood. If Rick and Samantha thought they'd chosen the perfect place to disappear into the system, they were about to learn they'd underestimated the one man who still knew how to fight from the ground up. Logan Mitchell wasn't just coming for answers anymore. He was coming for justice. The message came at exactly 4:42 p.m., a single terse text flashing across Logan's burner phone screen. Meeting confirmed. 11 p.m., service lot. Bring the cash. The number was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakably familiar. It wasn't meant for him. It had likely been copied from the fake customer contact form he'd filled out during his undercover visit as Jake Anderson. That alone told him everything. They were confident, too confident. They didn't even bother double-checking who they were texting. And why would they? From their perspective, the operation was secure. The system was compromised, and the boss was asleep at the wheel. But tonight, they'd find out just how wrong they were. Logan stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone and stood up. He wasn't going home. He wasn't calling security. He was going to be there, eyes wide open and camera rolling, when the whole house of cards came crashing down. By 10:15 p.m., Logan had parked a rented SUV 3 blocks away from the dealership. He wore dark jeans, a hoodie, and a cap pulled low over his face. In his jacket pocket, a small body camera recorded continuously. A digital voice recorder ran silently in his chest pocket. A secondary camera, mounted discreetly on the dashboard, was angled directly at the dealership's rear service lot. The neon blue glow of the Mitchell Motorsports sign flickered in the distance, now feeling more like a warning beacon than a brand symbol. He watched the minutes tick by. At 10:47, the first shadow moved. Rick Dalton stepped out of the warehouse's side door, talking on his phone, gesturing toward the loading dock. He looked calm, comfortable, like a man who'd done this dozens of times before. Samantha appeared shortly after, dressed in all black, her usual warm demeanor replaced with cold calculation. They didn't speak much, only brief, focused exchanges that signaled a well-rehearsed process. At 10:53, a white cargo van pulled into the lot with its lights off, backing up to the loading bay in complete silence. The rear door swung open and 2 other men emerged, both unfamiliar to Logan, both moving with practiced precision. Moments later, a second van arrived. Then a third. From his vantage point, Logan watched as motorcycles, some of them models he'd personally signed off on, were rolled out of the warehouse one by one, covered in moving blankets, labeled for transport. A Ducati, a BMW, even a vintage Indian Scout. Tens of thousands of dollars in inventory, disappearing into the night. He tightened his grip on the phone. Every instinct screamed to call the police, to end it right now. But something held him back. He needed more, a wider picture, confirmation of just how deep this operation ran. And then, as if on cue, headlights swept across the lot from the opposite side. A sleek black SUV rolled in, and out stepped a man Logan recognized from earlier in the day. The so-called customer, with designer sunglasses and expensive sneakers. He shook hands with Rick, flashed a thick envelope, and began inspecting the merchandise like he was choosing cars at an auction. The entire exchange took place with an ease that chilled Logan to his core. This wasn't a side hustle. This was organized crime, running through his warehouse like it was theirs. Logan reached for his phone again. It was time. But before he could dial, flashing red and blue lights split the night wide open. A voice boomed through a megaphone. FBI, this is a federal operation. Step away from the vehicles and put your hands where we can see them. Chaos exploded. The buyers tried to run. Samantha darted for the service entrance. One of the van drivers attempted to speed off, only to be cut off by a blacked-out tactical vehicle screeching into place. Within seconds, agents in full tactical gear swept through the lot, surrounding the suspects, pinning them against vehicles, shouting commands. Rick froze mid-step, arms raised, his eyes darting wildly. Logan sat frozen behind the wheel of his SUV, breath held, adrenaline coursing through him like fire. He hadn't made the call, but someone had, and they had come prepared. As the scene came under control, a woman in a dark coat approached the line of suspects, flashing her badge. Special Agent Natalie Chen, FBI. We've been tracking this operation for 6 months, she announced. Tonight was the final piece. Logan opened his door and stepped out into the light. Agent Chen looked up, immediately recognizing him. Mr. Mitchell, she said, stepping forward, we've been hoping you'd stay out of harm's way. Logan offered a tired smile. Figured I'd stay close to my property. They shook hands briefly, and as agents began logging evidence and towing away the vans, Logan finally exhaled. It was over. At least, the part in the shadows. But as he looked around, at the piles of stolen inventory, the staff he once trusted now handcuffed on the pavement, the name Mitchell Motorsports painted in big bold letters above them all, he knew this was just the beginning. He had saved his company, but now he had to rebuild it. Rebuild trust, rebuild process, rebuild himself. As the last of the suspects were loaded into cruisers and the flashing lights faded into the night, Logan turned back toward the empty service lot, his mind already racing ahead. Tonight, justice had arrived, but tomorrow, accountability would begin. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was still echoing across the service lot when Logan stepped forward. The chaos had begun to settle into controlled precision. FBI agents cataloging evidence, towing away the vans, documenting everything from forged shipping labels to stacks of untraceable cash. But Logan's eyes weren't on the operation. They were locked on Rick Dalton, now sitting on the cold pavement, wrists bound behind his back, his once smug demeanor cracked by panic. Logan didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to him, ignoring the agent giving directions nearby. Rick looked up and froze, recognition flashing in his eyes. "You!" he spat, disbelief twisting his face. "You were Jake Anderson!" Logan didn't blink. "That's right," he said, his voice low and cold. "And you've been stealing from me since the day you walked through that door." Rick's mouth opened, but no excuses came. He knew there was no way out. Logan knelt down to meet his eye level, fury barely restrained behind his words. "You didn't just take bikes, Rick. You used my name, my company, as a cover for whatever this is." Rick gave a bitter smile. "You don't get it, do you? This place was just one piece. There's bigger money behind this than you know. You think I run the show?" Logan leaned in closer. "Then start talking." And Rick did. He spoke fast, like a man with nothing to lose, how he was recruited by a group laundering money through high-end motorcycle dealerships across multiple states. How each target was carefully chosen, reputable, respected, and too large to catch every detail in their books. They embedded people like him, like Samantha, into warehouse and sales teams, used falsified inventory entries and transport logs to cover for missing bikes that were later resold in other regions or used to move money and drugs across state lines. But it didn't end with Rick and Samantha. As Rick continued, more names came out, names that made Logan's blood run cold. Brian Whitaker, his head of security for over 6 years, had helped disable internal surveillance feeds during off-hours. Logan thought back to all the late-night emails Brian had sent, claiming faulty cameras, requesting minor software changes. Now, it all made sense. Then came Chad, the sales manager, whose pushy tactics Logan had already flagged as problematic. But now he learned Chad had been directing specific customers towards special deals, ones that involved no paperwork, no questions, and significant under-the-table cash. It was a network within a network. Not just a handful of bad actors, but a coordinated cell that had infiltrated every major point of operational control: logistics, security, and sales. They weren't just taking his bikes, they were using his business as a criminal pipeline, and making him the unwitting face of it all. Just as Logan stood up, trying to process the weight of Rick's confession, Agent Rachel Chen approached, holding a thick binder and a digital tablet. Her face was a blend of relief and seriousness. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "we've been tracking this group for over 9 months. We didn't have enough to move until tonight. Your undercover role, that changed everything." She handed him the binder. Inside were photographs, maps, phone records, and screenshots. He flipped through it, seeing his own dealership pinned among others across the country. Arizona, Nevada, Texas, even a location in Ohio. Chen continued. "This is part of a larger criminal syndicate that uses businesses like yours to move high-end goods under the radar. But your company is the first we've been able to use as a cooperating asset. You've helped us expose a multi-state laundering operation." Logan let the words sink in. He should have felt proud, relieved, even vindicated, but instead there was only a heavy ache in his chest. These weren't just criminals, they were people he had trusted. People he'd shared coffee breaks with, walked through company strategy meetings, even mentioned by name during staff appreciation luncheons. And now they were all in cuffs. All part of something that could have destroyed everything he'd built. Not just the business, but its reputation. "How many others were involved?" he asked quietly. Agent Chen sighed. "We're still unraveling it. There will be arrests in other cities tonight. Your branch just happened to be their most profitable." Logan swallowed hard. "Of course it was," he said. "We were the most trusted. As the agents continued clearing the scene, Logan took one last look at the group being loaded into cruisers. Rick refused to meet his gaze. Samantha stood silently, her expression unreadable. Brian was yelling something about being set up. Chad was stone-faced, pale. Logan turned away. Whatever came next, internal audits, press coverage, the fallout from customers and employees alike, he would face it. But tonight, the betrayal had been unmasked, the rot had been exposed, and thanks to a decision he'd made to put on a hoodie and play the part of a customer, an entire network had been brought to its knees. He didn't know yet how deep the damage went, but one thing was certain. Logan Mitchell would not let this be the end of Mitchell Motorsports. He'd rebuild, and this time, nothing would slip past him. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable night behind the Mitchell Motorsports service lot. The same lot where trust was shattered now stood rebuilt, both in structure and spirit. The cracked pavement had been resurfaced, the rusted chain-link gate replaced with reinforced panels and smart locks. But the most meaningful transformation wasn't in concrete or steel. It was in the atmosphere. The dealership that had once unknowingly served as a front for a criminal network had emerged from the ashes, sharper, stronger, and more self-aware than ever. Logan Mitchell had wasted no time. Within days of the FBI's takedown, he'd begun implementing sweeping changes, investing in upgraded tech infrastructure, biometric security protocols, AI point inventory monitoring, and perhaps most revolutionary of all, a new initiative he called the Redemption Program. Unlike a simple hiring policy, the Redemption Program was personal. Logan designed it for those who had been given up on. Individuals with minor records, past mistakes, or unstable backgrounds who had turned their lives around but couldn't find a second chance. Logan knew what it was like to make bad calls and come back from them. This program wasn't just a PR move. It was a reflection of his belief that the best people weren't always the ones with perfect resumes, but the ones who had something to prove. With the help of legal advisors and HR professionals, he built a structured vetting and mentorship framework that allowed new recruits to grow within a culture that valued accountability and personal growth. For every ghost that had once haunted his system, he now planted seeds of hope, real people who were ready to work, ready to be seen. The most unexpected addition to the new Mitchell Motorsports came when agent Rachel Chen accepted Logan's offer to join the company as the new director of security. At first, her colleagues at the bureau were stunned. How could a top federal agent leave a high-profile career to join a private business? But Rachel had seen something in Logan's leadership, something rare. She saw a man who didn't just want to survive scandal, he wanted to build a legacy from it. Together, Logan and Rachel restructured every point of vulnerability, from warehouse handling to digital access control. Real-time vehicle tracking systems were embedded into every high-end model. Blockchain-based ownership ledgers were introduced to prevent forgeries, and surveillance operations became the most advanced in the region. Within 2 months, customer satisfaction scores reached record levels. Reviews flooded in, praising not just the product, but the people. Internally, the culture shift was even more profound. Logan made it a point to be visible, not as the distant CEO, but as a mentor. He sat in on orientation sessions, walked the sales floor regularly, and hosted weekly Q&A breakfasts with staff across all departments. He shared his own mistakes, his own blind spots. "You're not here to be perfect," he'd tell the new recruits. "You're here to be better than the person who almost destroyed this place." The Redemption Program became a source of pride within the company, especially as its early participants began to rise. One now worked in customer relations, another had just been promoted to assistant inventory lead. Each had a story, a setback, and a fire in their chest that Logan recognized as the spark of resilience. For those who had remained at Mitchell Motorsports through the ordeal, the ones not tied to the criminal ring, the healing had taken time. But something beautiful had grown in its place. Departments that once operated in silos were now more collaborative than ever. Communication became transparent. Loyalty wasn't measured by years served, but by how quickly someone lent a hand to the person beside them. Rachel often said the culture reminded her of a unit in the field, bound not by hierarchy but by mission. Logan smiled every time he heard that, because in a way, that's exactly what Mitchell Motorsports had become. A mission, a movement, a statement that integrity wasn't just about preventing betrayal, it was about empowering people to do the right thing, even when no one's watching. And Logan never stopped watching, not out of paranoia, but out of purpose. Every success story that came through the redemption program was a reminder of how close he'd come to losing it all, and how grateful he was that he hadn't. Late at night, he'd walk the now brightly lit warehouse floor, not searching for threats, but marveling at how quiet peace could feel when it was hard-earned. He'd stop by the staff bulletin board, where photos of employees on their first day were pinned next to handwritten goals and community awards. These weren't just staff members. They were guardians of a place that had nearly been taken from them. And as Logan turned off the final light before locking up, he knew the dealership would never be the same again. Not because it had fallen, but because it had learned to rise with purpose. The sun had just begun to rise behind the Mitchell Motorsports headquarters, casting long golden rays across the freshly waxed showroom floor. Logan Mitchell stood in the middle of it, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, quietly watching the light creep across the polished chrome of the latest Triumph Street Triple. It wasn't the bikes that gave him pause, it was the people arriving one by one through the side entrance. Young men and women, some no older than 19, wearing nervous smiles and clutching notepads, water bottles, and ID tags. They weren't customers. They were the first class of Project Horizon, the most ambitious endeavor Logan had launched since the rebuilding of his company began, and this time, it wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. Project Horizon had started as an idea scribbled in the margins of a notebook during a sleepless night. Logan couldn't stop thinking about how close he had come to losing everything. And he couldn't shake the thought that the very systems his company once used for gain could now be used for good. The program offered free motorcycle safety courses, technical skills workshops, and long-term mentorship to at-risk youth in the community. Kids who had dropped out, aged out, or been pushed out of the systems meant to support them. Instead of becoming another statistic or target for recruitment into the same kind of crime ring that had once infiltrated his own company, these young people were being invited into something different, a place where they could learn not just how to ride, but how to grow, how to lead, how to believe again. Within months, the impact was undeniable. Graduates of Project Horizon began joining the Mitchell Motorsports workforce, not as a charity hire, but as contributors. 2 of the initial students became certified service techs. One, a young woman named Tasha, who had been in and out of shelters, now oversaw customer test rides and safety briefings. Another had started a local riding club, focused on promoting road safety among teenagers. The local news picked up the story, then the regional outlets, then eventually a national spotlight fell on the dealership that had once been rocked by scandal and emerged as a symbol of resilience. Mitchell Motorsports was now being recognized not just for its products, but for its principles: integrity, redemption, community investment. What had once been an embarrassment was now a blueprint. But Logan never let the applause distract him. He remained grounded, continuing to host Friday mentoring circles in the dealership's break room. He joined career fairs, volunteered at schools, and opened the company's training bay on weekends for local youth programs. In one particularly emotional moment, he handed a Project Horizon graduate their first company ID badge, the same way his father had once handed him a wrench and said, "Build something you're proud of." That same graduate now led a workshop on electrical diagnostics. Logan would often find himself watching from the sidelines, a soft smile on his face, knowing this was what legacy looked like. Not the logo on a wall, not the revenue charts or the number of franchises across the region, but the people whose lives were better because this place existed. The transformation of Mitchell Motorsports had turned it into more than a dealership. It had become a movement. Corporate leaders across the country reached out to replicate the redemption program. Universities invited Logan to speak on ethical leadership. Even competitors began adopting elements of Project Horizon, proving that social responsibility and business success weren't mutually exclusive. They were partners in sustainable growth, and through it all, Logan remained true to his core. Every new hire, every policy update, every investment passed through the filter of one simple question. Does this reflect who we want to be, not just what we want to do? And so, standing in the early morning stillness, Logan allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He thought back to that day he walked into his own dealership wearing a disguise, believing he was just checking in on customer service. What he found instead was a cancer, an internal betrayal that nearly took everything from him. But as he looked around now, at the vibrant hum of a dealership reborn, he realized the betrayal hadn't broken him. It had reshaped him. It had stripped away illusion and forced him to lead not just with authority, but with empathy, with courage, with clarity. What once felt like the darkest chapter of his life had become the cornerstone of a legacy far greater than he had ever imagined, and with the next generation walking through those doors, eager to learn, eager to change, Logan Mitchell knew this was only the beginning. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or reminded you of the quiet strength that lives inside ordinary people, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs it. At Deep Inside HQ, we don't just tell stories, we reveal truth, resilience, and the power of second chances. Your support helps us bring more voices to light and build a community grounded in empathy and impact. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next, because sometimes one story is all it takes to change the way we see the world.